Did you know Fast Growing Trees is America's largest and most trusted online nursery with thousands of trees and plants and over 2 million happy customers? Whether you're planting fruit trees, adding privacy, brightening things up with flowers, or bringing in houseplants, Fast Growing Trees has it all. Even better, they can help you find options that are right for your climate, your space, and lifestyle. Click Order Grow. Every plant arrives healthy with the Alive and Thrive guarantee straight to your door. So if you're ready to get planting, this is the moment. Right now, they have great deals on spring planting essentials, up to half off on select plants. And listeners to our show get 20% off their first purchase when using the code WWO at checkout. That's an additional 20% off. Better plants and better growing at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code WWO at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code WWO. Now's the perfect time to plant. Let's grow together. Use WWO to save today. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions apply. Go to growingfasttrees.com for details.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, expands our base. We have so much to cover this morning, and I want to remind you we will do question and answers as part of this segment as well. But let's start with the fact that even as I am speaking to you, J.D. Vance is on an airplane headed toward Islamabad for a series of discussions with the Iranian leadership. Now, let's make clear something that is very important. There was no unconditional surrender, as Donald Trump demanded, and the government of Iran has not changed. We are still dealing with the mullahs. And all of the spin that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance choose to put on this doesn't change the reality. The reality is that the radical regime in Islam remains in place, and missiles are still flying. And yes, Iran still has numerous capabilities, including closing the Straits of Hormuz. Let's be clear about the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is not open. Now, occasionally a ship will get through. And the only reason is because Iran controls, let me underline that, controls the Strait of Hormuz. This, of course, completely contrary to what Donald Trump announced. Donald Trump's whole point was that Iran would cease to control the Strait of Hormuz, that the United States would supervise everything, and that all would be well. That clearly is not the case. Now, J.D. Vance said, as he got on his plane, that the United States will not be played. But the simple truth is we have been played by the Iranians, and there is no doubt that they believe they are in a much stronger position. And let's be honest, they are. They control the Strait of Hormuz, not the United States of America. And, of course, it is clear that they still have a missile capability, despite the fact that Donald Trump has said that missile capability was completely decimated. It simply is not true, and we need to understand this very clearly. Has the United States won anything? And the answer really is no. The United States of America is still dependent on what Iran says, what Iran does, and, well, frankly, we are not in a strong negotiating position. For J.D. Vance, this is a critical moment. This is his first real exposure on the world stage. Will he be able to do what he needs to do? That is the question. And what about his negotiating team? Let me tell you something. This is a very disturbing moment, and it proves something that is profoundly important, and that is that Donald Trump is not in control. At the same time, inflation is increasing in the United States. And that, my friends, will have a huge impact on Donald Trump domestically. There are so many questions here. But now, let's take a hard look at Lebanon. The government of Israel is prepared to negotiate with the government of Lebanon. The problem is there is no real government in Lebanon. Hezbollah controls what we will or will not do in Lebanon because Hezbollah operates as a state within a state. And that's a problem because Hezbollah is committed to the destruction of Israel, as is Iran. And what does Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, have to say? As long as Israel is under attack, they will not cease what they need to do for their own protection. Many of us can remember when the north of Israel was completely vacant because people were leaving because the rockets were falling. Netanyahu, who is going to run for re-election in a few months, cannot afford to have Lebanon as a problem. And let me be clear about this as well. The United States and Israel have many common denominators. But Israeli security is separate and distinct in the minds of Israel's leaders. And it's not just Netanyahu, it's everyone. Everyone understands clearly the importance of where we are today. Now, I want to explain that these talks begin on Saturday. The talks in Islamabad begin, and will they create something? Let's remind everyone that when Barack Obama spoke with the Iranians and created an agreement, the Republicans, led by Donald Trump, immediately denounced it as a sellout. So I want to ask a simple question. What will happen if Donald Trump comes back with an agreement which does not conform with everything he demands? And what does he demand? That the Strait of Hormuz be opened clearly and precisely, that there be no toll unless the United States levies the toll, because the whole point was to make the Strait of Hormuz open and a free waterway as it once was. But there is something far more critical which needs to be explored and understood with great care. And that is the fact that the unconditional surrender of Iran is not happening. That you can, in the words of Donald Trump, bomb them back to the Stone Ages. But Iranian ideology dictates that they continue to pursue their policy. And I don't think that's compatible with the United States. In short, what will happen here? Do you think that Trump and Vance and the negotiators would declare victory and simply move on? Is it possible to do that and not lose face in the world? I'm telling you, this is a fascinating moment. And Donald Trump and his diplomatic skills, something he touted as a businessman, really are on the line. I want also to explain to you, as clearly as I can, that what Donald Trump has done to our NATO allies is a disgrace. By the way, if there were a reason to remove a president of the United States from office, this would be it, because the NATO alliance has been so critical, not only to the United States, but to the world in terms of preserving order and peace. And Donald Trump's constant deprecation of the NATO alliance is, to me, extremely alarming. And so we need to consider that as well. The other thing that Donald Trump did yesterday was to talk about new conquests. Yes, conquests. And I was fascinated on CNN to hear them contrast that with Franklin D. Roosevelt, who, on the eve of D-Day, pointed out that we were not after conquests, we were after liberation. What a contrast between a great president of the United States and Donald Trump. We are not after conquest. We are not after control. That is antithetical to everything the United States has stood for. And let's be clear, that is the problem which Donald Trump has in giving a clear and decisive message about where America stands in the world. He continually talks about liberating Cuba. And I must tell you something. There are many presidents who've spoken about the need for Cuba to be liberated, but the liberation of Cuba will come from its own people. And if Donald Trump believes that he can liberate Cuba, we've got a problem. But we have a problem anyway. Remember, this is a president who is still ruminating about taking Greenland, if he can remember the difference between Greenland and Iceland. We still have a president who is talking about Canada as the 51st state. We are still talking about a president of the United States who is determined to build, in his mind, an American empire. This is something that every American needs to consider. Now, there are reports this morning that Democrats, some Democrats in Congress, are talking about removing the president, applying either impeachment or the 25th Amendment. So let me be crystal clear on this point. The House of Representatives can impeach by a single vote a president of the United States. But impeachment is not removal from office. Removal from office requires 2/3 vote in the United States Senate. And there is not a chance of a snowball in hell of a 2/3 majority of the Senate voting to remove Donald Trump. By the way, the implication of that is that J.D. Vance would then become president. And there is more and more talk about applying the 25th Amendment. And I want to repeat what I've said about the 25th Amendment. And that is that the 25th Amendment was intended for presidential disability, the kind of disability that Woodrow Wilson had in 1919, 1920, 1921. There was no 25th Amendment, and we had Wilson remain as president despite the fact that he was really unable to function. It could have applied had it existed for President Eisenhower after his heart attack, but it didn't exist. Instead, a written agreement between President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon, which served as the basis for the 25th Amendment, became the operational decision by the president. And there is also the question of what would happen if a president were disabled, mentally impaired. Well, let me remind you that the provisions of the 25th Amendment call directly for the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare the president unable to function. That isn't going to happen with this administration. Donald Trump's loyalists are going to stay right where they are. And make no mistake, this is an important point. Unless a president is completely disabled or is proven absolutely, without any hesitation or doubt, to be mentally impaired, there is no way the 25th Amendment will be applied. By the way, do you remember why there really was a 25th Amendment? It was to replace a vice president in the event that there was a vacancy, when Spiro Agnew resigned, when Gerald Ford became president, and Nelson Rockefeller became vice president. That's the real provision of the 25th Amendment which we have exercised. But all of the talk of impeachment, all of the talk of removal of Donald Trump, well, it rests on a very interesting point. As long as the Republicans control the House and Senate, there will be no movement in that direction. And as long as 2/3 of the Senate cannot be mobilized, it's not going to happen. And then there's the question of J.D. Vance. Who will succeed in the event of a vacancy? And that is J.D. Vance. And the question of his qualifications to be president of the United States, well, he's 35 years old, he was elected, and he is the heir apparent. But there are questions about what that would mean in terms of the direction of the administration. Now, I must spend a moment on Melania Trump. Yesterday morning, we all witnessed her appeal, speaking from the White House, from the very spot where her husband spoke, and the contradictions that she raised. Melania Trump, without any hesitation or doubt, is now calling for all of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein to testify before Congress. Not only that, despite the exchange of messages between Melania Trump and Jeffrey Epstein that indicated a great friendship, she is denying that friendship and saying, in fact, no, this was nothing, that I had nothing to do with anything dealing with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm glad she has done it. I think it's important, but I need to point out emphatically that one of these days, Melania Trump may be called before Congress as well. The whole point is the Epstein matter is not over. It's not done. It's still part of the discussion. And indeed, justice has yet to be done. most importantly, the relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein needs to be explored. And as surely as Bill and Hillary Clinton gave testimony, it is vital that Donald Trump be summoned before Congress to give testimony as well. Is this, as some have suggested, a deflection? I hope that that's not the case, but I also understand clearly that we have a serious problem with the Epstein matter. It is hardly finished, and there needs to be a recognition, a clear recognition, that this has to be dealt with. There is so much to talk about this morning, and there will be more, of course, over the weekend, and we'll be on it. But I am now going to conclude this with the simple note that I want to thank you for tuning into Around the Political World with John Rothman. I will love to hear your thoughts, your comments, and of course, I'm going to go now into question and answers. Now, let me explain to you that many of you have asked questions through GoGo's Ogre, but many of you have also sent particular questions to me that you want answered. So GoGo, I'm going to throw in a few that you have not yet heard because they've come directly to me. But let me remind you, this is as interactive as we can be at this point, and so your questions are critical. Many of you who are old friends simply contact me directly, and I love that. But let me now deal with Terry. Hi, Terry. Thanks so much for your good greetings. This is Terry's question. The chaos brought by this administration is finally getting to me, and I have questions, some rhetorical, most likely, but here goes. 1. If the nuclear option, Donald Trump's finger on the button, will anyone stop him from pushing the button? I know they've fired most of the generals with a conscience, but surely someone will countermand such an order. The only example we have of that, it was when Richard Nixon was in his final days as president, and Caspar Weinberger, who was then the Secretary of Defense, issued an order. And that order was very clear and very precise. And that was that no action should be taken unless or until it was confirmed. By the way, that applied to Secretary Schlesinger as well. This was a joint operation by members of the Nixon cabinet to restrain him from doing something. But we have no such provision. A president of the United States, as long as they are in office, is the person who is responsible. So we don't have a Cap Weinberger. We don't have a Secretary Schlesinger. We don't have anyone who would use those kinds of restraints at this moment. And as you point out, Terry, there was a purge of the military. And as a result, there really is no alternative. I must say that when we had a chief of staff who was willing to stand up to the president and just say no, Donald Trump was not happy and replaced him. And that may happen again. You ask a second question. Why has no one invoked the 25th Amendment? I addressed that in the body of my presentation at the opening, but I want to be clear. You ask how much more evidence is needed to convince Congress that he is a madman. And the answer to your question is it would require doctors to certify in order for there to be any real movement, in my judgment. The cabinet of the president, like the vice president, is a political appointee, and that's simply the reality. You asked the question, why are the Republicans so afraid that they are willing to blow up the world and our status and our values? The answer is because the Republican Party is no longer the party that we once knew. In fact, there was a letter to the editor in this morning's Chronicle pointing that out. The Republican Party has been taken over by Donald Trump. And as Donald Trump's son, Donald Jr., said on the ellipse when the insurrection took place in January of 2000, and I've got to stop and think for a minute, 2021, there is no more Republican Party. There is the party of Donald Trump. And I must tell you, it is profoundly concerning. We need a Republican Party that is fully viable and vibrant. By the way, if I may recall the Nixon days, We need desperately to have a Republican Party with a Hugh Scott, a John Rhodes, and a Barry Goldwater who will go down to the president and just say no. Let me also now indicate to you that your questions were welcome, Terry, and I appreciate the fact that you concluded with, P.S., thank you for your podcast. May I tell you, my podcast is a pleasure, and knowing that you are listening makes it all the more significant. And this comes from Gogo Zoger, from many of you who sent Gogo requests for my comments. Tim M. asks, the President of the United States can only commit our military for a certain number of days before getting authorization from Congress, right? What is the limit? Where does the limit come from? How can it be changed? Tim, the answer is a 60-day limit. It is in the War Powers Act. And let me tell you something. We saw an example just yesterday where Democrats stood up in Congress and wanted to debate the question of the War Powers Act. And what was the response of the Republican who was presiding? To gavel them down. Nothing will happen on this question as long as the Republicans control the House and Senate. And by the way, to limit a president's power when it comes to the making of war or peace is something that Congress simply has not had the ability to do. It's a strange condition because in the past we've trusted our president. We've believed that only a good and decent person could be president of the United States. That clearly is no longer the case. And yes, that is a direct slap at Donald Trump. A good and decent person would not be doing what Donald Trump is doing. Now, Jeffrey M. says, invading the Japanese homeland was not even necessary because the emperor was willing to try to surrender. Let me explain, Jeffrey. Historically, you're not correct. The question of what the emperor did or did not do came to light much later. The emperor was not in charge completely. He had his cabinet, and he had Mr. Tojo and others. The simple fact is, what we did in Japan was necessitated by the fact that we demanded an unconditional surrender, and the Japanese were unwilling to do it. And you go on to say, I'm not justifying the use of the bomb. Yes, you are. You literally just gave, albeit speculatively, justification for the fact that massive destruction by bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, densely civilian populated areas, even after the wholesale firebombing of Tokyo. Then you, like many others, have suggested that Harry Truman, a devoted Freemason, was somehow near great. If you take a look at the polls, kind of suggests consensus. I argue that Truman was absolutely not great, given the historical fact that he, on behalf of the Allied forces and the dropping benefit of the coming Anglo-American empire, committed the same war atrocities that today Donald Trump, you call him Trumpenstein, is committing on behalf of the same empire. Truman and Trump are more alike than they are different. You could argue Truman was more dignified, superficially I would concede, or that Truman was more presidential, which may or not be mere role-playing. My answer to you is a very clear and precise one. Your history is wrong. Jeffrey, we did not know in World War II how it would end. And in the end, I can tell you, my father was in the 77th Division. He was instructed as a medical officer. He was instructed to let his troops know that they should write letters home, because if there were an invasion, 1 million Americans might have died. You can disagree with what Truman did, and we've had great discussions about it, but the simple answer is that Truman did what he thought was correct. And I've talked about this in the past. He said he went to bed and he never thought about it again. I'm sure I would still be thinking about it had I been Harry Truman. But there is no comparison between Truman and Trump. On so many levels, I could go right down the list. But may I suggest that you read Harry Truman's book, Mr. Citizen, published in 1959, and you will see that Harry Truman's conception of the presidency and the former presidency and the power of the presidency is very clear. There's also a book that was published called Truman Speaks. It is Truman's response at Columbia University to a lecture he gave with question and answers. and you will see the clear distinction between Trump and Truman. In fact, Truman does deserve to be ranked as one of America's near great presidents. Donald Trump, hardly. This is from Bruce A. On Trump's Easter Sunday message, he asks, what does he mean by Tuesday will be power plant day and bridge day all at once? Because it was Donald Trump's intention to bomb Iran back to the Stone Ages and to hit all of the power plants and bridges. He in the end backed down, thank heaven. But he is still saying, if the talks break down, he'll go right back to that plan. So we're not out of the woods yet. David T. asks, Prime Minister Netanyahu implemented a solution to his problem in Gaza. That is otherwise known as genocide. The answer is no, David, I don't agree with you. Genocide means the mass destruction of a whole people simply because they are who they are. The Israelis have not committed genocide against the Palestinian people. They have attacked Palestinians and others, including Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon, who have threatened their existence. That's defensive. Let's be clear, David. Genocide is the mass murder of people simply because they exist, like the Jews, like the Gypsies. That's what Hitler did. But a crime against humanity needs to be understood clearly in the context of the fact that Israel did not commit genocide, is not committing genocide. They're fighting for their existence. You may not like their methods, and therefore you would have a perfect right to criticize particular policies of the Israeli government. And that, by the way, is normal in Israel. That is what Israelis do. They constantly criticize their government, whether it's Netanyahu or Rabin, of blessed memory, or Peres, of blessed memory. It didn't matter. Whether you were left or right, the criticism of a government in Israel is clear. All you have to do is take a look at the newspapers in Israel and to read accounts to see the disagreements. But no, Netanyahu is not committing genocide. And I think that is clear and precise in terms of an answer. Disagree with policy, but be careful what words you hurl around. Derek R. says, I guess that most of your Bay Area listeners are closet anti-Semites. Is that true? The answer is no. I don't believe that most people who listen here in the Bay Area are anti-Semites. And let me be clear. Criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. Criticism of Israel is not Jew hatred. But it can be when all of a sudden what you hear are invectives against Jews. And I think that's the important point that needs to be understood clearly and precisely. Criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. But when one lumps Jews as a total group into the criticism, then that is Jew hatred. So I hope I've answered clearly that particular question. I want you all to be aware that these question and answers come to me from so many different sources. And I'm glad that GoGo compiles them, and I'm glad you send them to me individually. There was no question this morning about Iran and the talks which will take place in Islamabad on Saturday. I answered that in the body of my opening comments here on Around the Political World with John Rothman. I appreciate your comments, your thoughts. I want to hear what you have to say. And my only regret is that it can't be more interactive. I long and yearn for the day when, like on KGO, we have the ability to exchange words, argue thoughts, and really come to conclusions. Let me conclude this with a question that was posed to me by Cecilia. The question is Donald Trump a danger? And the answer is yes. The logical follow-up to that, Cecilia, is how do we temper the danger? We have the Supreme Court, we have congressional elections, and we have good rational common sense. The Republican Party is the one which is challenged these days because as long as they kowtow to Donald Trump, there will be no solution to the broader problem of the integrity of the American presidency. I've spoken about that repeatedly. I shall speak about it again and again. So let's be clear. Donald Trump, to me, is a danger to the very essentials of America and our democracy and our system of government. I don't mind saying that because in the United States, we have freedom of speech. And I'm not the only one who is saying it. So let's be clear. Trump may be a danger, may be a threat, but he is the president and will be until he leaves office. And we have to think carefully, as I've tried to do today, about the implications of impeachment, the question of conviction, and of course the question of the 25th Amendment. A panel of doctors would have to certify Donald Trump is unfit to be president, and then the vice president and his cabinet would have to agree. Let me remind you that is highly unlikely given the political circumstances. However, if you have a president who becomes disabled and is clearly disabled, and the medical community can certify his disability, that becomes a whole different question. But that also raises the question about who is vice president of the United States. J.D. Vance is up for a real test as he flies to Islamabad today, and those talks that will take place on Saturday and, of course, on Monday, when I return, we will have a lot to talk about. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I do want to hear your thoughts on today's episode. I do want more of your questions. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. Remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand. And, of course, I will be with you on Monday, but we have a whole weekend to get through first. This show has been getting so much positive attention that we, of course, now have advertising support. We hope that grows, and we hope you understand that Around the Political World with John Rothman has a real message. My particular appreciation this morning to Gogo Zoger for the question and answers, for all her technical skills, and for all the work that she does. I'll be back on Monday. Heaven only knows where the world will be, but you and I know where we will be. We'll be right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.